In this video, I'm going to be going over my workflow for color grading analog footage, specifically for the Z9 and Z8 cameras. We're also going to be taking a look at some NRAW footage as well and how we color grade it and kind of the things to think through. Found some issues as well shooting in NRAW that I wanted to point out. So let's go ahead and dive in and take a look at some of this footage. All right, I am in DaVinci Resolve, and this is what I'm going to be using mainly for color grading, specifically because it can natively support NRAW footage. So if we wanted to look at some of these raw settings, we can analyze it in DaVinci Resolve. Final Cut and Premiere do not have it natively supported, so you would have to transcode the footage in order to get it working and color grading there. But let's take a look at this first clip that we have here. We filmed this at a Nikon event a couple months back. And I'm going to be going through the different LUTs that Nikon offers, as well as some other third-party ones and the built-in color space transform in DaVinci Resolve. So first off, I have different nodes set up. This one is going to be the Nikon Z9 V1 version LUT. They also have the Z8, which is technically the version 2 of Z9 LUT. We also have a LUT from Gamut, which is a product that I've built so that we can have a base LUT that we can use. We also are going to be talking about the color space transform that is native to DaVinci Resolve, and then we also have a look from one of our creative packs on how that works with different bases. So right off the bat, we want to make sure, hey, is this white balanced and is this exposed properly? First off, I'm going to turn on a conversion LUT. So this one's from Gamut called Base LUT. And I need to turn this on so that I can kind of see where my exposure is sitting in any white balance adjustments. So I'm going to set that up and we're going to dive into the clip. And we're going to change and adjust our exposure and white balance. First thing we're going to do is exposure. Second will be white balance. When I'm wanting to change exposure, one way that I can do that in DaVinci Resolve is I can change my gamma to be linear. And whenever I come down to my gain color wheel here, and if I turn this down, it's going to react a little bit more towards the native exposure adjustment in camera. So I'm going to kind of bring this down to taste. I like the way that looks right there. We're going to label that exposure. I'm going to add a second node and we're going to do white balance. I think this is pretty close. I'm just going to use the picker and just select white on his shirt here. Didn't see hardly any changes over here. You can see it kind of popping up, and we can adjust the gain slider a little bit more if we wanted to get that white in his shirt to be a little bit more white. And that's pretty much it. And then whenever we wanted to add a look, I can add this kinetic look right here to kind of give it a nice stylized look. And this is more inspired by the Kodak 2383 look that we have, and this is called Kinetic 2. But if we wanted to adjust and look at the other LUTs and how they perform, let's take a look first at the Z8 LUT from Nikon, which you can pick up for free. And this is the LUT that they've chosen. If you can tell, they have a lot of this highlights that we're losing a lot of information in the highlights because it's clipping. They want you to expose really dark, but even so, even if you have a bright sky that you're trying to retain, it's going to clip with this Z8 LUT here. What's closer a little bit more is the Z9 version 1, and this one's going to be a little bit closer. It's still going to have some strong contrast in the shadows, but overall, this can work in certain scenarios, but I'm going to go through some other clips where you're going to see it fall apart whenever we get into some more highlight information. And then if you want to use a color space transform instead of using another camera manufacturer conversion LUT or our base LUTs from Gamut, you can use the color space transform that's only for DaVinci Resolve. So we're going to turn that on. That's an effect that you can drag onto a node over here, and you have to set your color space to Rec 2020, which is the color space that Nikon is using for analog, and then we can use the input gamma, and we're just going to set the output to Rec 709 gamma 2.4, which is the timeline that I'm using right now anyway. And you can see that it looks fairly well and balanced just as good. So those are two options that I would recommend if you're wanting to use a conversion. Our Gamut analog one or the color space transform would get you pretty decent results. Now let's move on to the next clip where we have skin tone that's in a higher range in the waveform. And this is where you notice LUTs falling apart. So we're going to go ahead and first of all, let's make sure we've balanced this image. So I'm just going to turn on our N-Log version, and then I'm going to change our exposure. If you don't want to use the gamma adjustment here in linear, you can just use your color wheels down here just like you do in Premiere or Final Cut. And we're going to start with our gamma, pull it down, probably right about there. It feels good. And then let's make sure that we're not clipping our shadows. Let's lift up that section down there and maybe pull down our gain a little bit more just because it's really hot on the skin. Kind of go back and forth, bring that up, the shadows there some more. So that feels pretty good with exposure. Let's add a label for that so we know what that is. Then we're going to go into our white balance, and you can use the color picker here. That's one option you can do it to kind of get it close. Another option, if you wanted to do that, is we're just going to use these waveforms, and we're going to take the tint, lean it over towards pink a little bit, just to kind of get it lined up. I'm looking at the skin tone indicator line. And then also our color temp here, I'm going to be looking for so this is good for skin tone. This one's good for white balance. And since this person is wearing a white shirt, we can use the temp slider to kind of balance that fairly out. Maybe bring this down just a hair. That feels fairly balanced, and then we can also see that we have some good skin tone on this line here. Now, when we come back here, we can look at the LUT and how it's affecting the skin tone. Looks really nice, soft, and pleasing, but if you use the Z8 LUT here from Nikon, it's going to destroy and clip a lot of these highlights here. And for the Z9 version 1, this one's a little bit better, but it just flattens that top part of the highlight spectrum. So these LUTs, by default, just do not work well on skin tone, especially with highlight information. You're going to lose dynamic range whenever you're placing that LUT on there. You'd have to do some adjustments to all of your footage if you're using these LUTs, so keep that in mind. Color space transform also works just like the gamut base LUT ones. You just got to be careful of some of the black levels of being crushed. It's a little bit stronger in the shadow base area for the color space transform, and then you can kind of see what a look might look on top of that there. So that's how highlights and skin tones look with different LUTs. And then here is another clip where we can see really strong highlight information on her hair. And then we have a few different colors there that we can look at. If we look at the Z8, absolutely crushes the highlights there. If we look at the Z9 LUT version 1, it flattens it, and so it doesn't perform very well. So the ones to use are going to be the color space transform here, which you are losing a little bit of that black detail kind of down there, just a little bit, not too much. And then our base LUT here that kind of evens it out. And then you can add a look after the fact if you want to. Now, let's get to another shot that's going to show this color chart here. And this is where we're going to start looking at some things. This is some footage provided from the Nikon team here. And this actually looks really good when you're using the Z8 LUT. Look at that. It looks really good in this clip. And that's because we don't have any extra highlight information that we're losing. And also it's exposed down in this lower range as is intended for the Z8 LUT. So if you're shooting darker areas and you don't have a lot of highlight information, you could get by with this Z8 LUT. The Z9 one looks better in my opinion. And you can see how that performs there. So these look really good in this scenario. And then whenever you put on the gamut base LUTs, it looks a lot softer. It doesn't look as intense. And that's because it's more balanced for all different scenarios. It's not specifically for a studio environment of this lighting space. One thing to keep in mind is the color space transform. Whenever you use that on this footage, you can see this blue area right here, this blue patch, is starting to fall apart and get clipped over here just slightly. And you can really start to see that in other scenarios like I'm going to show you in this next clip. Here, when you start increasing your exposure, you're going to see this blue patch right here and this area where you can see that this color space transform is really causing a lot of gamut clipping right here. So you can see it's at the edge of this area, and so you're going to start having some issues with the blue channel, specifically in the color space transform, where if you're using our gamut base LUTs, it's more subdued and it falls into gamut here, and you're not having any issues. Again, if you are at this highlight information, you can see right here, the Z8 LUT is just going to destroy it, and the Z9 version 1, even worse. You can see it's just rough. So don't use those LUTs in most scenarios. It has to be kind of more controlled studio lighting, in my opinion. But for the color space transform, one way to fix this is if you have this issue, you're going to have to come over to your effects here where you have your color space transform and come down to gamut mapping and change it from none to saturation compression. And by default, it's going to be at 1. And you're going to set your saturation max to 0.9 is what I noticed. It brings it back a little bit, but you can still see it's a little bit strong. So you have to be careful of using the color space transform when you have a lot of strong blue colors in the clip. So another one issue that I found is this right here. So this is an issue that is happening with NRAW footage, and hopefully that there's a firmware fix that can fix this, because when I'm looking at this clip, you can see this is the raw clip, and this blue channel is just way out of gamut, and it is completely clipping. So especially whenever you throw on the color space transform, it's going to destroy it. Our base LUT does subdue it a little bit, so it kind of brings it back somewhat, but you're already working with footage that is out of range. So if I switch to a .mov clip, you can see that it doesn't have any issues. So this is NRAW. And this is a .mov. I think this is H.265. So you can see that the issue is specifically in NRAW footage. So hopefully a firmware update will fix that. But that's one of the issues that I've noticed is with this blue channel, specifically in NRAW footage like we have here, you have to be careful of it being too strong, especially in the color space transform. You're going to be getting strong blue colors, where if you're using the base LUTs, it's going to be a little bit more balanced out. So keep that in mind. Now, if you want to understand where camera manufacturers are designing their recommended exposure settings, here is a way to do that. Is you take an original clip, and let's say we're going to throw on the Z8 LUT right here. Okay, we're going to come to our actual clip here, and we're going to add a power window right here. I'm going to enable it, power window, and then we're going to set an alpha output so that we can just draw this blue line here, and that'll allow us to kind of crop the image here. And we can look at this window right here, and this white line is at the 42 IRE scale, and this is what a general recommendation is for having your gray card set to 42 IRE after a conversion. So one way we can do that is we can add the conversion and then set our middle gray point to be right there. And since this is shot in NRAW, we can come over to our exposure and we can take this down until that middle patch lines up with 42 IRE, okay? So now we can just disable it. So this is where they recommend shooting for the Z8 LUT. This is what you'd want to do. So when you turn it off, we're now going to read and look at that same reading and see where that lies. So we're going to come down here to our levels, and we're going to change this until we get to that middle gray, and you can see that's at 31. They are recommending shooting for the Z8 LUT to expose middle gray at 31 IRE, which is so dark, you're going to be lifting up all that noise floor and those black levels and the shadows, and there's just a lot of issues with exposing really low. So I don't recommend shooting that low because I've noticed there's just a lot more noise in the shadows. So for the Z8, if you want to expose properly for their LUT, they want you to shoot at 31 IRE, which I don't recommend. And it's because there's a lot of extra noise in that noise floor, especially in the shadows. Let's try the Z9 LUT, and let's do the same thing where we're going to bring up our exposure until we get to 42, right about there. And let's turn it off. And then we're going to set our reference level up to here, which is around 37. So it looks like if you're wanting to film on the Z9 LUT, they want you to expose at 37 IRE, which is in fact part of their white papers. Whenever I researched exposing for Nikon, this is where they want you to shoot, is at 37 on the IRE scale. If you're using the view assist on the camera, the LUT that's inside the Nikon Z8, and I believe the Z9 as well, it's going to be rated for 37 IRE. Now, I've decided to build our gamut base LUT to kind of split the difference to be more around 40 IRE, which is about a half a stop brighter. So if I was to bring this up to 42, you can see right there. And then if I turn it off, it lands close to the 40 IRE scale. So if you're using our base LUT conversion, we recommend shooting your gray card about a half a stop overexposed, which is going to be closer to the 40 IRE level there. So if you're always curious about how to kind of rate a gray card and what the LUT is from the manufacturer, just throw it on there and set it to 42 and then turn it off, and you can see where that rating is in place. But hopefully that was a little bit helpful there. And let's continue on to some more clips. I'm going to go ahead and scan over to Final Cut to show you how to color grade N-Log footage. Now, in this case, we have a clip here. We're going to go ahead and we want to change our white balance and everything here. You can see that on our highlight information, we're probably going to need to push into our highlights a little bit for the blue range, and that's going to counteract that. Now we can go ahead and add our custom LUT effect to this clip or an adjustment layer, and then we're going to select Gamut Base LUTs and come down to Nikon N-Log. So here we have Nikon footage, and we can come back up here, make sure that our color wheels is above the base LUT, and then we can make sure any adjustments that we need to. Let's kind of get some warm midtones right there, and then our highlights just slightly balanced. So let's also bring down our midtone exposure. That feels fairly good. We're not clipping anything. Everything looks nice and exposed. So there is a proper white balanced image. I just was using the scopes to kind of get a little bit of the white dress here to kind of match up. We have it a little bit warm because it was really sunny. I don't want to take away that look. And then if we wanted to add another look, we can just add another custom LUT and then come down to, say, Kinetic 2, and then just change your intensity to taste. So probably 40% feels pretty good for this look. And there we have a working image that looks really nice, and you can see before and after. And this is color grading and log footage to get really beautiful results. And then lastly, we're going to switch back over to DaVinci Resolve and take a look at some of these final clips. This shot was provided by Nikon's team, as I mentioned before. And in this one, you can see that the Z8, when they start getting closer to this brighter window, it's going to start clipping this highlight information, which is why it's not recommended for anything with high dynamic range like this. And then also the color space transform. Be mindful of blue patches. Make sure, again, that you set your saturation compression to 0.9 for now until they change or adjust any of their firmware to kind of fix some of that blue strong saturation levels. And then you can also use our base LUTs, which work just as well. And you can also check out this clip right here. This is going to be our last final clip that we're looking at. Again, this looks phenomenal on the Z8. You can see that there is not any clipping levels, so there's a lot of information to retain. And in this case, this looks perfect. However, if the camera was a little bit further to the right and you were looking at the sun, you would see that it would be clipping and we'd not be able to work with it. So the Z9 and Z8 looks really great. However, if you want it to work and you want to have that image really pop, because we're rating it this one to be filmed a little bit brighter, we need to change the exposure setting of this clip. So let's go ahead and come back over to this raw information tab, and we can change it from project to clip. And that's where you can see that we have a Rec 2020 color space, Nikon N-Log. And then the only information you really get in NRAW is color temp and exposure. You get some of these other benefits as well, but there's not a lot of extra information in NRAW to really work with, in my opinion. So it's not extremely amazing. It is nice to be able to change it at this level, but it's not game changer in my opinion. But let's just lift up this exposure here. And then if you wanted to, you could change your shadows and kind of pull that down. If you wanted to kind of create some different contrast, you can, let's just reset that. You can just bump up your contrast to kind of get the look that you want. Now, I do want to show how to do it if you are not shooting in NRAW. What I would do is come to my color wheels, and then we're just going to increase our gain until we kind of get it higher. And then we can also just crank up our contrast a little bit. See what we're working with. Maybe let's bring down some gamma to taste, and then just make sure our lift is not clipping anything. And there we have a really good image that has the exposure levels that we want. And then if we add a look on top of it, you get a really nice, beautiful shot with our Gamut Base LUT and then a kinetic creative look. And then all we had to do was just adjust the first node to kind of get the exposure levels that we wanted to create this beautiful footage. So Hopefully this video is helpful in explaining how you can work with and raw footage. If you have any questions on color grading and log footage, just hit me up in the comment section below. If there's any future videos that you want to see or any type of color grading tutorials that you want, let us know. Again, you can check out our base LUTs at the link below in our description to pick up the N-Log base LUT, and then you can check out any of our creative packs over at Gamut, like the kinetic pack that I used here. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.